What's up, y'all? This morning we're going to be looking at World War II. Kind of like World War II really started after the aggression of all the different totalitarian dictators that kind of emerged in Europe in the early 1930s, and it kind of hits ahead once Germany starts to expand too much, and everybody can't really ignore them anymore. In this video, we'll be looking at the following essential questions. What factors led to the start of World War II? And then what were the key turning points in World War II in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific? Golden Hawk historians will explain and analyze the factors that led to the start of World War II and evaluate the extent to which different battles in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific were turning points during World War II. As you're watching, make sure that you're taking notes in Cornell or outline format as we've talked about in class. It's okay if you need to pause or rewind the video in order to ensure that you understand all of the information and you're taking good notes. So the Treaty of Versailles had pretty seriously damaged the German economy, but Hitler had promised to make Germany great again and return it to its prior greatness. So he started to secretly rebuild the German military and also announced plans that violated the Treaty of Versailles. But this action went completely unchallenged by Britain, France, or any of the other European powers that had been concerned about Germany's power during the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler started also sending troops into the Rhineland, which was an area that bordered France and was occupied currently by France, but was a major industrial center for Germany. This was also a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. France complained about it, but he didn't do anything about it. Hitler knew that the other European powers would avoid war at all costs, so he began to plan some more aggressive moves. He started putting on Austria to accept annexation and make them a part of Germany, and then Hitler also turned to the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with German-speaking people, and he was also allowed to do what he wanted by Britain and France. So at this point, he kind of considered that he could do whatever he wanted. The British and the French believed that their policy of not doing anything, or appeasement, in order to maintain peace, had prevented unnecessary war with Germany. Up in the top right-hand corner is a very popular political cartoon by Dr. Seuss, actually. It says, "Remember, one more lollipop and then you all go home." The sea monster represents Hitler and the German aggression, while the lollipops represent all of the different actions of appeasement that the European powers took in order to avoid war with Germany. While Germany was becoming a more aggressive power, Hitler was also building alliances with other totalitarian governments like Japan and Italy. And Germany and Italy and Japan formed the Axis powers, one of the allies during the World War II. While fascism and communism were enemies, Stalin worried that Britain and France wouldn't protect the Soviet Union from German expansion. The Germans and the Soviets then signed a non-aggression pact, or an agreement in which each side promised not to attack the other. The non-aggression pact also acknowledged an agreement that would divide Eastern Europe into Soviet and German areas. This will come back a little bit later. So overall, the causes of World War II, there's 4 of them. The World War I peace treaty, the economic and political factors, Hitler's leadership, and then diplomatic factors. The World War I peace treaty left Germany paying back large amounts of reparations that left Germany in serious debt, leading the way for a strong leader to come in and kind of mess things up. Also, the demilitarization of Germany, or the fact that they didn't have a standing army or any weapons at all, left Germany pretty humiliated and feeling like the weakest power in Europe. Different economic and political factors like the economic depression left Germany even poorer than it already was. And then also, Britain and France wanted peace at any cost through the policy of appeasement. Hitler's leadership, under him, he challenged the Treaty of Versailles through remilitarizing Germany, expanding German territory, and encouraging nationalism, which would also lead to World War II. Diplomatically, alliances were formed just like they were in World War I. The Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan, while the Allied powers were Great Britain, the United States, France, Russia, and China. The United States would join in a little bit later, but it started off with just Great Britain, France, Russia, and China. Great Britain and France also were practicing a policy of appeasement and letting Germany kind of do what they wanted, while America was determined to stay out of the war as long as possible in a policy called isolationism. On September 1st, 1939, Germany launched an attack on Poland. This kind of marked the start of World War II. Germans used their new tactic, blitzkrieg, or lightning war, that emphasized speed and close coordination between planes in the air and troops on the ground. The planes started the assault by catching the victims off guard, while fast-moving tanks moved in and then led by foot soldiers that smashed through the remaining resistance. On September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France then declared war on Germany, but they were too slow to help Poland, and Poland fell to the German forces. Hitler, however, had its sights on Western Europe, meaning France, Denmark, and Norway, and began making preparations to attack them. He quickly was able to take over Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, and Belgium, all the countries that were between Germany and France. But the Allied forces were no match for the German attack. Pretty quickly, the Germans were able to invade France through the Ardennes forest along the border between France and Belgium. This was a major forested area that the French had never thought that the Germans would take advantage of, and so it was left unprotected. The Allied forces were unable to slow the German steady march toward Paris, and on June 22nd, France had to surrender to Germany. The German-controlled part of France became known as Vichy France. Now Great Britain was the last Allied power standing between Germany and world domination. Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, started to inspire confidence amongst the British people. You might be familiar with the phrase, keep calm and carry on. That was one of the phrases that Churchill came up with. Germany tried to break Britain's stand by sending thousands of planes to attack Britain in the Battle of Britain. Britain used radar to locate German airplanes and defend themselves. They were able to warn citizens to get into different bomb shelters before the Germans even were able to attack. The Germans mainly attacked London in an attack that became known as the London Blitz. The goal of the Germans primarily was to attack civilians and break their will to fight the war. If you are familiar with the London Underground, the Underground actually served as bomb shelters for anybody that was stuck in the streets during the bombings. It was built so far down underground that the civilians were protected from the bombs. The Blitz overall killed thousands of civilians and destroyed London, but the British refused to give in. Keep calm, carry on. The German failure to take over Great Britain didn't stop Hitler, though. He turned his attention now to the Soviet Union. Hitler broke his non-aggression pact with Stalin and sent 3 million German troops into the Soviet Union, hoping to expand Germany's border on the east side. Germany was successful at first, using blitzkrieg tactics against the Soviet army, but the Soviets were able to slow the German offensive. As winter fell, the German troops weren't prepared. They didn't have the type of jackets that they needed to survive the harsh Soviet winter, and the Soviets were able to fight back. Even before the United States got involved, the United States had been shipping supplies across the Atlantic to help the Allies, primarily Britain. Germany depended on the U-boats, just like they had during World War I, to sink the ships that were carrying the supplies to the Allies in Europe. And the Battle of the Atlantic began. The American ships began traveling in convoys to deflect attacks by the U-boats, but there's quite a few number of ships at the bottom of the ocean that were sunk by the U-boats, and consequently, there's also a bunch of U-boats down there. Japan militarized following World War I and now also were threatening Allied colonies in the Pacific. Hideki Tojo had been developing plans for a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor began, leaving 2,400 Americans dead. The attack on Pearl Harbor was just the motivation the United States needed to join World War II on the side of the Allies. Thousands of Americans started to sign up for the fight. The major war battles in Europe and North Africa helped to change the tide of World War II. The Battle of El Alamein, for example, moved the troops out of North Africa up through Italy and back into Europe, and they were able to push the Germans and the Italians back. The British, specifically in Egypt, needed to maintain control of the Suez Canal because it provided direct access to oil that was helping to aid the war effort. The Germans had threatened the British stronghold there, also wanting the Suez Canal for the oil. British troops used secret German codes to skillfully win the Battle of Alamein in Egypt, and the Axis power in North Africa was weakened. Once the United States troops arrived, they were able to push the powers out of Africa and into Italy before returning them back to Europe. At the Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviet Union was able to stop the German invasion. When the winter set in, the Germans were at a pretty big standstill. They didn't have the right supplies that they needed. So Hitler created a blockade of Leningrad and to starve the Soviet people out. He ended up killing over 1 million civilians just from starvation alone. As weather warmed in the spring, Hitler ordered a renewed effort in the Soviet Union on the city of Stalingrad. The Soviet Union knew that they needed to keep Stalingrad at any effort because if Stalin's city, that was named after him, was taken over, then all morale would drop. The German tactic of blitzkrieg pummeled Stalingrad, but the Soviets were desperate to save the city. The Soviets launched a counterattack and were effectively able to crumple the German forces and force them to surrender. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway and the Battle of Guadalcanal represented the different island hopping that the Allies did in order to push the Japanese powers all the way back to Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor had left the American naval fleets in kind of damaged and delayed their ability to respond to an attack. The United States territory of the Philippines was quickly overrun by the Japanese, and thus let the Japanese be at the height of their power. They had planned to capture the strategic island of Midway to lure the remaining American naval ships into a battle. The Americans, however, had broken Japanese code and knew the time and date of the attack, so they were able to be on the defensive when the Japanese came, and we were able to push them back towards Japan. After this, the Allies began island hopping, or capturing island after island, trying to push the Japanese forces back to the island of Japan. They were able to capture weaker islands, which would then cut the Japanese off from the needed supplies. However, the Japanese were using a really scary tactic called kamikaze pilots, where these were pilots that loaded their planes with explosives and deliberately clashed them into Allied ships. They were suicide bombers. At the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Americans were able to push the Japanese out of the islands and on their way back to Japan. Now that we've gone through the different battles and of all the stuff in World War II, please make sure that you read back over your notes and that you have all the necessary vocabulary. Thanks for joining me for this video, and I'll see you in class.